Buenos días, bienvenido a
Good morning. Welcome to the webinar series for coaching presented by our sponsor, Gallagher. Thank you, Gallagher, for its constant support as an official sponsor of the Coach Webinar series. Thank you all for being here in this webinar. We want to offer the coaches more learning options around the areas they want to learn. Today's webinar is about the training on young athletes. This webinar gives simultaneous interpretation in 8 languages. You can choose your language. Use the globe that is at the bottom of your screen within Zoom. Please add any question you may have through the chat for the speakers. Oh, there's also a Q&A function. You can use it as well. Good day, everybody. My name is Alvaro Brochero, Athlete Leader and host of Special Olympics Venezuela and president of the Regional Council of Athlete Leaders from Special Olympics of Latin America. I feel very excited and happy to welcome you in this webinar series. First of all, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity of being a moderator to tell you a little bit about me, my trajectory as athlete and athlete leader within Special Olympics and as a trainer. Let me tell you a little bit about my story as an athlete. I started playing baseball when I was 6 years old. In 2005, I started playing futsal in local games, and then my team became champions. In 2008, I was invited to be part of Special Olympics participating in football. After many trainings, by 2011, I represented Venezuela in the Special American Cup in Paraguay, where we got the sixth place. Then by 2016, I had the opportunity to represent Venezuela again in the American Special Cup that happened in Uruguay. And here we got third place. Special Olympics Venezuela has given me many opportunities to keep on growing as an athlete, as a leader, and as a person. In 2019, I had a wonderful experience of being certified as physical trainer in a training given by CONMEBOL. In 2020, I was chosen to be a game commissioner for Unified Football Games that happened in Detroit in 2022. Currently, I participate in the pilot plan on training to be trainer assistant within Special Olympics. And that way I can keep giving inputs to the organization and continue developing as an athlete leader within the sport environment. Now I would like to share with you a little bit about my work as a coach since 2017. I've been working in the football academy in Caracas, Futuro Vinotinto. I started as a trainer assistant, training children from 4 to 18. After lots of efforts, dedication, discipline, and as a great challenge, the Academy in 2022 shows me to become a coach. And that's my position right now. And I train students from 8 to 12. Through my first year as a coach, my teams became champions of the Navidad Cup. After that, they gave me the opportunity to train the sub-17. I work as a football coach throughout all of this time, and this has taught me how to learn and be better every day. I can tell you that all of these opportunities I had because I'm empathic, respectful, responsible, disciplined, of fostering good communication with my colleagues, students, and superiors. To be a good leader and to teach how to lead has been the key to be where I am at right now. What I value the most as a coach is the respect that I have gained and the trust that I have gained from my team, students, and their parents. I feel so happy to work in what I love and share my knowledge and my passion for football at work and within Special Olympics. Once again, thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to share my own story. Thank you. Now we're gonna be watching a brief video that shows the great work that coaches do to motivate their athletes. They motivate them to train and continuously compete within Special Olympics competitions. Thank you to all the coaches. Thank you for everything that you do. Enjoy this video.
Continuamos.
Okay, let us continue. Hayley Kavanagh. She's the Research and Development Coordinator for Young Athletes within Special Olympics Ireland. She is doing her doctor's degree with the University of Dublin from Special Olympics Ireland. She was mainly in the Young Athletes program. Hayley also is a coach of her local club of young athletes, and she is passionate to give opportunities within sports and health for everybody. Welcome, Hayley.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. I'm delighted to present to you on some of our research that we've undertaken with the Young Athletes Programme in Special Olympics Ireland. So I'm going to start the presentation now and just give an overview of some of the key points that we're going to look at today. So I'm going to give you a bit of a background on the So Fun project. That's what we've called the project, the problems it tackles, the need for it, and the work done up to this point, and then the future direction. So where do we go from here now that we have these findings? I'm also going to look at some key statistics. So looking at the motor skill proficiency level of children with intellectual disabilities and seeing how this compares to their typically developing peers. We're going to look at the coach's ability to assess the children's skills and also highlight the voice of the coach and how important that is. So what is motor skill proficiency then? So there's different terms that we might hear as coaches that mean the same thing, that mean motor skill proficiency. So it could be motor skill performance, motor ability, motor coordination, fundamental movement skills, and motor competence. So I'm going to show you the definition now of motor skill proficiency. So it's the quality of a person's movement and the level of their performance outcome. So how well they perform a movement when doing different movement skills. So as coaches, for us, when we look at our athletes, we want to see how well they perform and what the quality of the movement is like. Is it high quality or low quality? And fundamental movement skills. So that is a word that you're going to hear a lot today because my project focused on the fundamental movement skills of children with intellectual disabilities. So it's an aspect of motor skill proficiency that is commonly investigated. So why is it important? So fundamental movement skills, they're the building blocks that are needed for taking part in sport and physical activity. Children aren't born with the ability to start skipping, start throwing, start kicking. We're not born with the ability to do that. So as coaches, we need to teach the children these skills so that they can learn them and practice them over long periods of time to help develop them. Poor proficiency in fundamental movement skills, we know from the research that it leads to lower participation rates in sport and physical activity. And finally, fundamental movement skills are the gateway to more advanced movement skills. So we need to have good proficiency in these key skills like running, catching, throwing, kicking in order to progress onto sport. So this is a picture of our athlete pathway in Special Olympics Ireland. So you can see there in the orange, this is So Let Me Have Fun. So this is where the young athletes will try and develop their fundamental movement skills. Now, I know in other countries across the world, the Young Athletes Programme is run maybe for children aged 2 to 7 years, but in Special Olympics Ireland, we decided that the children enter the programme at 4 and they try and build and develop their fundamental movement skills before moving on to specific sports, which is then between 8 to 12 years, and that's in the yellow, So Let Me Get Sporty. So the reason for this decision is because there's a lot of research that has been carried out to show that when children are between the ages of 4 to 12, it's a really important time for them to be able to develop and learn these fundamental movement skills. So as coaches, we need to know that it's a really key period. And if we don't try and help the children to develop their skills now, they're less likely to want to continue to participate in sport and physical activity. So it's a really, really important time period. And that's why the Young Athletes Programme is so important, because it's a perfect opportunity to try and provide the children with the skills that they need before they go on and compete and train in 1 or 2 sports. So what do the stats tell us? So what is the research telling us? So compared to typically developing children, children with ID are 3 times more likely to have lower fundamental movement skill competencies. Compared to their age-matched peers, children with ID overall have lower motor skill proficiency, though. So that is something as coaches that we really need to be aware of so that we can work on improving this and closing the skill gap. And finally, having low fundamental movement skill proficiency affects children with ID. It affects their locomotor skills, so their skipping, running, hopping, their object manipulation, things like catching, throwing, kicking, and their balance skills, which ultimately influences their activities of daily living, so day-to-day activities, sport, and physical activity. So what is the current global picture of fundamental movement skills for children with intellectual disabilities? So in my research, we had a look at all of the studies around the world, and it was 26 studies in total that compared the fundamental movement skill proficiency of children with ID to typically developing children. And what we saw in the results was a very scary picture. So there's a really, really large gap that is happening between the typically developing children and the children with ID. So it's the size of the gap, it's 1.24. And in research, we would say a large effect is 0.8. So if 0.8 is large, 1.24 is really, really big. So this was important for us to recognize that, okay, the skill gap is really big, but now what steps can we take to go about closing that gap between children with ID and their typically developing peers? So at the local level then, so if you keep clicking on that slide for me, Jeff. So we assessed 100 young athletes, so 100 children aged 4 to 12 years in Ireland. We tested 12 of their fundamental movement skills across all 3 subsets, so locomotor, object manipulation, and balance. We had 10 young athletes clubs take part in this research, and then we also worked with 8 to 10 coaches to hear their feedback and experiences of delivering the program. So on the next slide, I'll show you what we found. So just take a moment to have a look at this slide. So what you see here is the average score for each of the components of the fundamental movement skills. So for the locomotor skills, so our running, our skipping, our jumping, on average, children with ID were getting a score of 12 compared to their typically developing peers who were getting 22.7. It was the same then for the object control skills, so 14.88 compared to typically developing children who were scoring 25.39. And then for the balance was particularly poor overall for both groups. So the typically developing children were scoring a 6.5 compared to children with ID who were scoring less than 1. So overall, the typically developing children were performing better than children with ID, but ultimately both groups of children, the motor skill proficiency levels are quite low overall. So it is not just children with ID, it's children in general who are experiencing low motor skill proficiency levels. So then we decided to have a look at gender, because as coaches, and these are things that you might have heard, is that, oh, the boys that you coach will be better at kicking, catching, throwing because they might play football, basketball. The girls that you coach will be better at doing things like gymnastics or dance, so things like skipping or jumping and potentially balance. So if we click forward again for a second, this will highlight the gender differences. So for both groups, there was no gender differences seen in the locomotor proficiency or in the object control. But for balance, there was a gender difference only for the children with ID group. And we saw that girls were significantly outperforming the boys when it came to balance. But overall, as I've said, the fundamental movement skills are really low, but balance in particular, we saw that it had a 0% mastery. So none of the 100 children who took part in this study had mastered the skill of balance. And when we say mastery, that means being able to do the skill correctly, perfectly, without any mistakes. But none of those children were able to do that. And when we're working with people with intellectual disabilities, we know that as people get older, they're at an increased risk of falls. So balance is particularly important, because if we're seeing at this very young age, between 4 to 12 years, that balance is very poor, what does that mean for these children as they get older? So a key focus for the next steps of this project will be to focus on balance and try and improve the balance proficiency among this cohort in order to have those, you know, a decreased risk of falls then as they get older. Age differences then. So again, as coaches, we might have different age groups that we coach in our session. And typically what we would hope to see is that as children get older, because they've spent a longer amount of time practicing and reinforcing their fundamental movement skills, their skill level should ultimately be getting better as they get older. And this is what we found in the typically developing children group. So as the children got older, their skills were getting better and better, which was great. But when we had a look at our children with ID group, this wasn't the same. So it wasn't happening. So as the children got older, their skill level wasn't getting better. It was kind of plateauing and staying at the same level. So there is a bit of a theory behind, you know, a reason why this might be happening. And it's called the skill and developmental skill learning hypothesis. So that means that children who experience motor difficulties, as they get older, the learning gap between themselves and their typically developing peers continues to grow. And the potential impact of that is it can be seen in physical education class, in sports, and in competition. And what can happen is that, and what we don't want to happen as coaches, is that the children with ID might withdraw or drop out of sport and physical activity because they feel that they're not as good at performing these skills compared to their typically developing peers, and they might not be enjoying sport and physical activity as much. So it is really important that we have fundamental movement skill interventions that target the needs of these children all across the age span. So from 4 right up to 12, to ensure that they have the skills that they need before they go into sport-specific training. So what you have here is a picture of a potential child's motor skill development pathway. So the blue boxes are fundamental movement skills, and that's the area which we are focusing on. So as coaches, you might think, so what if the children with ID have lower motor skill proficiency? Why does that matter? So it matters because as coaches, we need to be aware if our athletes are not developing adequate proficiency in fundamental movement skills, because they have the potential to be stuck. And you see the black box there at a hypothetical proficiency barrier. So it's a glass ceiling, essentially, that if children do not have higher levels of fundamental movement skills, that they won't be able to go up to the next level, which is our transitional movement skills, where we're linking the fundamental movement skills together, or our sport-specific skills like dribbling in basketball, for example. So it's really, really important that for all coaches that we are aware of the need to develop these children's fundamental movement skills. It's really important for them to be able then to learn sport-specific skills. And this is kind of a little picture of what we mean. So if you can't run, or if an athlete that you have, you know, can't run, then they're less likely to take part in things like football, floorball, basketball. If they can't throw, then they are less likely to take part in bocce, bowling, table tennis, all of these things. So this is why it's really important that we give our athletes the prerequisite skills that they need to be able to stay in sport and with Special Olympics for life. So another area that we looked at, and this might be of interest to some coaches who are on the webinar today. So we're looking at coach-led fundamental movement skill assessments. So as part of the research, we went out to the clubs, we visited the clubs, and the research team looked at the children's fundamental movement skills. But we know that sports coaches play such a vital role in developing children's fundamental movement skills, particularly children with ID. But despite this, very little research has been carried out investigating whether coaches can accurately report on the fundamental movement skill performance. So look, it's something that you might be doing in your clubs at the moment. And if it is, I would love to hear about it. But we know that coaches can act as a first line of defense in identifying any motor impairments or motor difficulties that may exist. So from the research, we identified the need to upskill sports coaches so that they have the ability to tailor the fundamental movement skill programs to effectively target the weaknesses in fundamental movement skills for this population. So how did we do it then? So you'll see a little picture or a screenshot of a survey or questionnaire that we used with the coaches. So we asked the coaches to rate each child on a scale from 1 being not too good at to 4 being really good at. So how good was the child at performing each of the skills that the researchers had tested? So the coaches that we worked with were super excited because they said, yes, we're going to be really, really good at this. We think we know how well the kids are performing. So it was a big surprise for them to see that the coaches were overestimating the children's skills. So they thought that they were better than they were. So they were overestimating the locomotor skills, so our running, skipping, jumping, by 21.5%. And then our ball skills, our object manipulation, catching, kicking, and throwing by 33.8%. So the children's actual scores were here, and our coaches were thinking the scores were up here, so a lot higher than they were. And we needed to find this out because as coaches, if we are overestimating the ability of the athletes or the children in the session, maybe we're not targeting the session to the right level for the children or providing them with the right learning environment. So the practical implications from this then. So we know now that we need to upskill and train coaches to observe, detect, and correct any errors in fundamental movement skill performance so that they can guide the physical development of children. And we also think that these assessments, if they're coach-led, will encourage the coaches to develop and improve the fundamental movement skills of children with ID, enable the coaches to track the progress of each child in their session. And it could also highlight to the parents particular skills which require continued work and development, because as a parent, we might want to practice. If our child is weaker at one skill, we might want to practice that at home with them. And that will help them build confidence to go back to their session the next week and demonstrate and do that skill again. So another aspect of the research project that we really wanted to do was we wanted to have the voice of the coach included in this, because I think what happens a lot of the time is that our national governing bodies of sport, they look at coach education or they look at programs and they don't ask the people who are delivering the program how they found it, what do they think of it, what are the needs of our coaches. So this was really, really important. We wanted to give the coaches a chance to share their experiences of delivering the Young Athletes program. So what we found. So I love this title, Coaching from the Heart, because all of the coaches I've met and worked with in Special Olympics, that is what you do. You coach and you give everything from the heart. So when we asked the coaches, what did success look like for them in a young athlete session? Because keeping in mind, young athletes is all about play and fundamental movement skills and making new friends. It's not so much about being really technical in sport. So the coaches said that meeting the needs of their individual athletes was really important to them. And if they could do that, that meant success. And I think as coaches with Special Olympics, we know that each of our athletes have really individual needs. So it is important that we can cater for that in our sessions. Prioritizing fun and enjoyment. So for all children, I think the number one reason why they want to continue coming back to sport is because they find it fun, they enjoy themselves at their training sessions, and they make friends. Building a supportive coach-athlete relationship. So other research that has been done around the world with Special Olympics has found that a key motivation for athletes coming back is you guys, it's the coaches. So building that really nice coach-athlete relationship is super important. And finally, fostering a sense of belonging. So again, from the research, we know that a lot of the time, being able to say, I'm an athlete or I'm part of a team, it means a lot to the athletes that we work with, because it means that people aren't just saying, oh, a person with a disability or a person with an intellectual disability. They can identify themselves as an athlete, people who are sporty, people who are competitive. And so that was really important. And that was part of how the coaches define success. And for me, if we click on again for a second, I Coach Kids is a really global, it's a big global movement, and it's a really good organization that looks at how we can be as child-centered and keep children in sport and physical activity for life. And I Coach Kids have done a lot of work putting a pledge together on what are the top 10 things that children look for when they participate in sport. And as coaches, these are a really nice set of golden rules that help us coach and be child-centered. So number one, keeping the children at the center of everything we do in our training sessions. Being holistic, so looking at children as a person overall, you know, their confidence, their motivation, their social development, not just on their physical competence. Being inclusive, and that's something that Special Olympics coaches are amazing at, and we can be really inclusive in our sessions to cater for all needs. Make it fun and safe. Prioritize the love for sport over learning sport. So maybe some coaches might not agree on this one, but I think it's incredibly important, because if we can give children that love for sport and the want for them to keep coming back week on week on week, they will learn the sport and they will get the technical skills. But if they don't have the love for it, then they'll drop out and they're less likely to be active for life. Focus on our fundamental movement skills, and that's what we've spoken about in this presentation. We need to give them the skills that they need in order to stay in sport. Engage parents positively. So again, for some coaches, sometimes working with the parents is their least favorite part, but parents are another gatekeeper for their child's sport and physical activity participation. So it's really important that as coaches, we have relationships with the parents and encourage them to practice at home with their child. And progressive programs so that the children keep progressing. Use different methods to enhance learning. And use competition in a developmental way. So they are just some 10 golden rules for having a child-centered coaching session and for a nice supportive environment. And the link to that will be on the dashboard after the webinar today. So finally, from the findings of the BHD, what is the plan of action? So Special Olympics Ireland, we have decided that we're going to look at designing and implementing a multi-component intervention. So currently the Young Athlete Toolkit we have hasn't been updated since 2016 when it was rolled out. So we want to look at producing a new toolkit to include session plans and at-home activities. We're going to get the parents involved, and we're going to look at piloting some workshops for parents to attend so that we can give the parents the knowledge and confidence on why fundamental movement skills are important and teach them some activities that they can try at home with their children. We're looking to create a new coach education course using a bottom-up approach. So using the voice of the coach and seeing what the coaches would like to learn, what they feel they're currently not, what we're not meeting the needs of in the coach education at the moment. And we want to ensure that the voice of the coach is incorporated into the content and delivery style. And we're going to work with Sport Ireland Coaching in order to do that. And we also want to create a continuous professional development opportunity for existing coaches. So from the research, we know that at the moment, the coaches can't accurately assess the children's skills. So we want to upskill them to observe, correct, and detect errors in children's fundamental movement skill performance in order to improve skill development overall. So the take-home message from today's presentation is that we want to keep children with intellectual disabilities in sport and physical activity for life, and having a good proficiency in fundamental movement skills is the key to doing this. Thanks for listening.
Gracias, Hayley.
Thank you, Hayley.
Ahora le vamos a presentar
Now we would like to introduce to you
a Holly y a Sam.
Holly and Sean.
Preguntas y respuestas si las preguntas llegan a través del
If
chat.
you have questions and answer to the chat, this one question per speaker.
Preguntas preseleccionadas antes del webinar en vivo.
We're going to have also pre-selected questions.
Para que Hayley, la cual mejore la manera de capacitarse como entrenadora.
So Hayley can improve
Y monitor
the way they
con
train as a coach
asistencia FMS.
and monitoring with
niños con
FMS
discapacidad
in
intelectual.
children with intellectual disabilities.
Yeah, so the best way
Para que
to
Hayley
train
y Sam,
coaches to assess children's motor
es una
competence.
buena manera
Álvaro,
de evaluar
Álvaro,
si el aprendizaje social
Álvaro,
y emocional han tenido
Álvaro,
lugar con un niño con discapacidad intelectual.
Álvaro. Hay que leer las biografías de Holly y Sean, donde dice, Holly Jacobs es la directora de investigación.
Hi, everybody. I think, Jeff, we can go to the
Okay.
first slide.
Ok,
Welcome,
Jeff, yo creo que podemos
welcome.
ir a primera diapositiva.
We are going to talk today about coaching youth athletes with a focus on social and emotional learning. So some of you may be familiar with the term social and emotional learning, or SEL, some maybe not so much. I'd love to see in the chat, where you are with social and emotional learning. Are you really familiar? Are you not so familiar? Are you maybe just going to learn about it for the first time today? Would love to see where everybody's at. So I'll take a few minutes to start to describe SEL in the context of the work that Special Olympics Unified Champion Schools has been doing here with youth in the United States, just so that we're all on the same page. And the great thing about what I'm sharing today is that it's applicable for all ages, for all people, whether they have a disability or not, and no matter where you live. So no matter the age of your athletes, whether you coach a unified team or a traditional team, whether you're based in the US or anywhere else in the world, the principles that me and Sean are going to talk about today will apply to everybody, and especially your youth athletes. So on the slide right now, one of the most prominent SEL frameworks in use today, this is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learnings framework, or the CASEL 5 SEL framework. That's CASEL, C-A-S-E-L. So the diagram on the left depicts the 5 core domains of SEL: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And those are surrounded by increasingly larger concentric circles, which are the contexts or environments that youth experience day to day. There we have the classroom, the school, families and caregivers, so what's happening at home, and surrounding everything, encompassing everything, communities. So for Special Olympics, we're often operating in that community sphere, which provides great opportunities for SEL skill development outside of school and outside of the home. And so we'll talk more about that alignment as we go through today. On the right side of the diagram, we have some examples of what each SEL domain looks like. So self-awareness is made up of identifying emotions, self-confidence, recognizing your strengths and weaknesses, among other skills. Self-management examples are impulse control, stress management, goal setting. I'm sure you've seen skills like these in action on your team. If you've seen self-management or self-awareness skills as a coach, let's do a little chat last. Let me know in the chat what that looks like on your team. Social awareness is perspective taking, empathy, and respecting others, among other skills. Relationship skills. Some examples of that are communication, relationship building, and teamwork. And responsible decision making is evaluating situations, problem solving, and reflecting, among other types of skills like that. So I'm sure a lot of that sounds familiar. If you have any examples that you'd like to share of these skills in action on your team, let us all know in the chat. Pop some examples in there for us to reflect on. Which skills or domains have been most prominent on the teams that you've coached. So we can go to the next slide. So that is a lot to take in, and it might sound like SEL is a big and complicated concept. So I will try to use this slide here just to simplify it for us. So imagine you're on your break, maybe lunch break, maybe you're in line at the cafeteria. If you work at a school, maybe that's a situation you've been in. You're really hungry, want to get a lot of food to fuel up for the rest of the day, but you can't just go right for the food and try to carry it all in your arms. First, you would need a plate, something to put it all on. And so without the plate, all of your food would be all over the ground. And so that's really what the quote on this slide is getting at. The quote says, "The good news is that SEL is not another educational fad. It's not one more thing on your plate. It is the plate." So SEL should not be one more thing to worry about doing, or something that feels like it's too much to do, or just another thing that we have to do among the many, many things that we are all already doing. SEL is the plate. It's the foundation to everything we do, whether we are a coach or an athlete or sort of a random person we pass on the street. It carries us through life. It's the positive relationships and the building blocks to fostering human development, and at no time is this more important than for youth. As a coach, SEL is the foundation of the positive relationships between you and your athletes, and even between the athletes on your team. And the good news is that SEL is already happening on your team. And we're here today to talk about how to really maximize what is happening and why that's important. We really want to help you strengthen that SEL foundation for your team. And so the slide that's up now, I just mentioned that SEL is already happening on your team. And so we will be talking more later on about why we know this, but just a few reasons on this slide about why that's the case, why sports are an ideal setting for SEL development for youth athletes. These are evidence-based reasons backed by research studies. Sports are flexible, less formal, and more unstructured than classrooms or schools. Sports are naturally fun and engaging, where youth are learning without it feeling like learning. Sports promote positive youth-adult relationships. Sports help youth learn and apply life skills in new ways. And sports provide opportunities for leadership. And so I'm going to hand it over to Sean. He's going to dive more deeply into some of these points and what he covers next.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Thanks for that, and thanks for Jeff for having me on. I'm excited to be here. Again, my name's Sean. I'm with Special Olympics North America, and I'm work with coach and resource development. Before that, I was with a local program running games for 20 years, and I've also coached in youth sports for about 15 years in a variety of sports, soccer, or football for the rest of the world, basketball and tennis. So excited to talk to you guys about how to take everything that Holly has dropped on you and the amazing wisdom teaching you what social emotional learning is. And now you're a coach, you're going to the field, and now what? So go ahead and Jeff, click the next. A lot of the questions when I used to coach a youth football club or soccer club with my coaches is what I would talk about, bringing social emotional learning skills into their sessions. And these are a lot of the questions I got and comments. So when you're thinking about this as a coach, taking it to the field, I'm sure one of these are coming up. How do I do it? It's too much to add into my practice. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a sport coach. Might just be a parent or somebody trying to coach our athletes. My athletes are all such different levels. I try, but I don't see any changes. These are things that are all very relevant and very good thoughts for you to have. And I just want you to know you're not alone. It's definitely something that is a learning skill for all of us as coaches. And it's just something that we want you to put into your coaching philosophy and add to your arsenal as you grow. So moving on from there, I do want to start before I kind of give you some thoughts. This is a chart, and I wouldn't call it a chart. It's more just a graphic that I've seen used over and over and over in youth sports, and it can be either within sports skills or even in the social emotional learning side. And this is something I actually show to all our parents whenever I start a season with new kids when I'm coaching sports. Is a lot of times parents and coaches and thinks that the development is going to be this straight line for our athletes, and it's not. It's going to have ups and downs and backwards and forwards, and you just have to be patient. And it's even more like that within Special Olympics, that those small growths or might be smaller than you're used to with your maybe the that you have coached over the time. So excited for you guys to learn about some ways to do this, but just remember that in the back of your head, that development is never ever a straight line. So let's go on to the next slide. So I'm trying to give you some, one of the things that Jeff had asked me to do is try to give you guys some tangible things that you can take onto the field or to the into your training with your athletes, that you can focus on those social emotional learning sides. And one of the words you're going to hear over and over again is positive. I'm going to say that about 10 times. It's not rocket science. It's mostly just a commitment, like I said, to your coaching philosophy. And the first thing I'll just say is you have a positive environment. And the first thing is it starts with you as a coach. You must lead by example. I'm excited that you guys can learn about this aspect, because you must have to stay calm. You have to lead by example and understand that the athletes are watching you even when you don't think they're watching you. So if you can start off by basically handling yourself as a coach, you'll be amazed by how much they're learning from you minute by minute by minute. So those are the easy ways. The first thing to develop those skills is just know that they are watching you and create that positive environment. So let's go on to the next slide. So next, and this is funny because I was kind of laughing. I've seen it now twice. Hayley talked about it before in her earlier slide about building positive adult-youth relationships. Holly mentioned it a little bit earlier, and so I'm also mentioning it, building those positive adult-youth relationships. And here's a quote down here that from Greg Popovich, and it talks about, Greg was asked, he has always called Coach Pop, what is the most important thing for you as a coach? And what do you think about the most? And this was his quote: relationships with people are what it's all about. You have to make players realize you care about them. So he wasn't talking about how good of players he drafts, or the drills that he does, or the skills that he's been able to do, or the tactics that he does. He talked for a long time just about the relationships that he has built with his players. And it starts from the very beginning all the way up to adult players. I would be curious to know how many across the world know who Greg Popovich is, because he's one of my favorite coaches. So if you want to throw it in the chat and you think you know who Greg Popovich is, I'd love to know. Just throw it in there. Be curious if you know who he is. So a couple things that I had put in here, just some 5 things. It's easy ways, is be approachable, be respectful, be fair, be patient, be a good listener. It seems easy, but if you must have to focus on these things every single practice with your athletes, and it'll make things so much better for you. So go ahead on to the next one. So, and correct a couple of you, my favorite coach, somebody put in there, yes, he's a San Antonio Spurs coach. So if anybody's wondering, that's an NBA team in the USA. So now, Sean, I need to build relationships. You've got me. Positive adult-youth relationships. Well, how do we do that? Now, this is going to seem simple, but it's something that sometimes as coaches, when we're on the field, we're so focused on teaching our sports skills and making sure we get through our practice session that we forget this type stuff. And I'm just going to keep talking about how there's simple ways that you can build those relationships. And it's simple things like this. Have you learned all the names of all your team? One of my little fun tricks is with my youth teams is that I give them all super awesome nicknames that promote something that they do amazing. And they have embraced their nicknames, and they get t-shirts with their nicknames on them, and they love that type of stuff. Learn about what they are you finding time to talk about them throughout the practice or before and after the practice? And then one of the main things I'll focus on here is, are you setting individual goals for the athletes? This is a really important thing, and it takes a lot of time, but I really do believe, and I used to make all of our coaches that I was over with our club, is that they had to do this on a semi-annual basis. They had to meet with them before the season, talk about what their individual goals were. And these goals were not just sport specific. These goals could be about these social emotional learning skills. Are you listening? Are you being a good teammate? Are you able to stay calm in stressful situations? So these are things, that's a simple thing that you can do that lets this athlete know and their parents know that you care about them and their development as we go through their time. So, okay, next slide. And so one of the things that I wanted to mention too is when you talk to all our players, sometimes, and I used to see this all the time, is a tendency not to talk to all our players. We have a tendency sometimes to talk to our best players, and sometimes maybe our worst behaved players, because those are the ones we need to focus on. And they see that sometimes, definitely our athletes. So make sure you're taking the time to talk to all of them as much as you possibly can. And one of the hard parts for me, if you coach like a football team, it can be really hard because you have 13, 14, 15, 16 players, and you talk to one and you feel like you've done the job, but you haven't talked to the other 15, and you might not have talked to Billy or Johnny or Sally in like 2 weeks and you don't realize it. So there must be that focus from a coach to really have those conversations. And I put on here, when are the times that you can talk? And it's not rocket science again, but can you talk to them before practice? Can you talk to them during a warm-up? Even between drills while you're setting stuff up, ask simple questions. And these are the questions you can ask. These are the questions that I ask. How's school? How are you doing in school? How's your family? What's your favorite TV show? And there's ways that you can do this. Like one of the fun things that we do as a team, like if I have to break them up into groups, let's say where they're going to partner up and with a partner, instead of just giving them a partner, I might line them up and go 1, 2, 1, 2 and break them up into those groups. But how do you line them up? So I might make them line up alphabetically by their favorite TV show, and they have to all line up. So this does a couple different things. First, all of them have to get together and talk to each other and work together and come up with how that looks. And then I get to go through and we get to laugh about like what their favorite shows are. And now I've got something about them that I can talk with them later on. Same thing when we're working on drills. I might break them up into a group of 2 or 3, and I might give them a question that they have to, while they're working on, let's say, dribbling. When they come back to me, I'm all right, did you guys find out about each other? The question might be like, who's your favorite teacher? Who's Billy's favorite teacher? What's his favorite class? So they're actually having to talk to each other and converse with each other and building trust and understanding each other. And that gives me more stuff that I can learn about them in bulk, that I have the time to be able to learn more about them and build those relationships up. Okay, great stuff. So thanks. Let's go to the next slide. So third time using the word positive. Are you using positive reinforcement? Are you go ahead, Jeff, a negative Nelly, or are you a positive Polly? And this is a tough sometimes as a coach, because for me, I have to self-evaluate myself as a coach many times, because I have such high standards for the players as you get to know them and you appreciate the things they can do, is that you really have to make yourself understand what they're doing and not as much what they're doing poorly, right? And that can be hard sometimes, because one, it's not coming from a place of anything bad. It's just you have such high standards for them. Sometimes you're like, they should just be doing stuff right all the time. And you really have to change that vibe and make it positive and talk about all the great things that they're doing to continue that positive development. And then one other thing I'll add is, go ahead to the next slide. Use positive reinforcement beyond just sports. And this is, again, going back to just reinforcing your philosophy. Are you focusing on these things? So it's very easy as a coach to say, hey, great kick, great catch, great throw, great shot, all these different things, great time that time in your running. But are you focusing your positive reinforcement on those social emotional learning skills? Hey, great job listening today. Hey, you were an awesome teammate today because I saw you pat Billy on the back when he made a mistake. Hey, I know you had some adversity today. You got fouled so bad. They came and wiped you out. Referee didn't call it. They took it down and scored on you. And I know last week you would have gotten mad and got a yellow card. Now this time you were calm, you understood. And so I'm really proud of you for your growth in that aspect. So it's not just talking about catching, throwing. It's also about this type of learning too. And they're going to want that type of positive reinforcement from you. And they're going to seek it out more and more the more that you give it. So again, just put that into your arsenal as a coach and it'll help a lot. Okay, next slide. Last thing, be real quick here, because I know we're running out of time, is teaching resilience, how to overcome adversity. And this is one of the things that sometimes I see within Special Olympics that's lacking for coaches. They might come from a different organization coaching. They come to Special Olympics and they want to create this perfect, happy little bubble within their team, and they're not teaching them resilience. They're not challenging the athlete. And just remember that this is just as much a part of the social emotional learning skill as handling adversity, putting the hard work in. And I go back to that example of, if I've seen teams come to games for the first time where an athlete gets fouled in basketball, gets hacked on the arm, they take the ball, go down, and they score, and the athlete is unable to handle it because they have not been taught that in practice, how to handle that type of adversity, how to handle being challenged, it's okay to fail. My favorite quote of all time is down here. This is literally my favorite sport quote, and I've used it in the team I've ever coached. Is Michael Jordan, my favorite player of all time. Kind of dates me a little bit. I'm a little bit older now, but I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. You must allow the athletes to have the chance to fail so they can grow. You know, they must try skills over and over and over again, and let them know it's okay to fail, right? So it's using positive poly type thoughts when they fail, so they're willing to fail and be better and better and better over and over again. Okay, next slide. And I'm just going to finish up this little paragraph here. I won't read it, but it's basically what we're talking about as why you're developing their skills so they can become a well-rounded individual. I'm going to basically say that all can be said in this quote very quickly. It's another one of my favorite coaches. A good coach can change a game, and a great coach can change a life, right? And that's what you're doing when you're developing those SEL skills. And just, I want you to put these little tactics in your arsenal as a coach and put them out there, and you'll see a lot of change and change in those athletes from start to finish. I'm going to throw it back to Holly. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So thank you, Sean. So much great information there about ways that you can actively promote a positive environment for your youth athletes to grow skills in the different SEL domains. I'm going to take it back to the research for just a few minutes to show that everything Sean just mentioned from his experience as a coach aligns with research about SEL and sports. In this case, I'm talking about high school unified sports, athletes between the ages of maybe 14 to 18 or up to 22. This diagram, I know there's a lot going on, but this should look a little bit familiar. It's the Castle SEL domains. There's some percentages there, and then a bulleted list or some bulleted lists. So we observed unified sports teams here in the US to see what SEL looks like in that setting. We saw that the largest share of interactions between athletes and partners on those teams were relationship skills. 35% of the time, athletes and partners were demonstrating things like positive affirmations, camaraderie, and emotional support, which sounds a lot like all the positive relationship building that Sean was talking about. We also saw a fair amount of social awareness skills and self-management skills, about 20% of the time for each. Things like being aware of others' feelings, awareness of where teammates were located on the court or field, verbal encouragement to oneself and others, perseverance, which Sean also talked about. And although fewer, we did also observe self-awareness skills and responsible decision-making skills. Next slide. So to wrap up with everything we've shared today, why should you care about SEL? Well, as a coach, you have a unique opportunity to help your youth athletes work on skills in an applied setting that's probably more fun than school or what happens at home, and which will challenge them in positive and supportive ways. When youth develop SEL skills and have a good foundation of those 5 domains, they'll be better set for life. Research has shown that participation in SEL programs improves academic performance, helps youth have fewer conduct problems and lower levels of emotional distress, and have better attitudes about themselves, their peers, and their school. And studies that have followed youth for several years have shown that these effects can last for years, which if you coach youth athletes about to leave high school and head out into the world, you know that having a solid SEL foundation at that age is everything. So last slide. But mostly you should care about SEL because the work we've done with SEL on unified sports teams indicates that youth athletes feel it helped them. On the slide here, I'm not going to read it, but there's 2 quotes. It really was hard to pick just 2 among the many, many years of research that we've done with this. But these 2 athletes really just exemplify a few of the reasons why an intentional focus on SEL on your sports team will help them. So thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Holly y Sam.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Sam, for your valuable presentation.
Preguntas y respuestas.
Questions and answers. You can type your questions in the chat. This is first question, which is for Hayley. Hayley, what is the best way to be trained as a coach to accurately monitor FMS in children with intellectual disabilities?
That's a great question. Thank you. So as part of the next phase of the research project, we are trying to decide and figure out what is the best way for coaches to learn. I know that in Special Olympics Canada, they have a fundamental movement skill program where they train the coaches to assess children's skills. So we're hoping to take some learnings from SO Canada and the Coaching Association of Canada on that one. But I think it really depends on, from the research perspective, what tools that you want the coaches to use. So for us, we use the test of gross motor development 3 to assess the children's skills. So when we would look to train the coaches, we would probably look to train them on that assessment battery. But there is a lot of other motor skill assessment batteries out there as well. So it's to see what one best suits your cultural context as well.
Gracias, Hayley.
Thank you, Hayley. Another question for Holly and Sean. What is a good way to evaluate if social and emotional learning has taken place with a child with intellectual disabilities?
It's a great question. I think the first is go back to, did you put goals for them? We talked about creating their individual goals. If you added those social emotional learning goals, and if you've got them individual based for that particular athlete, then you'll be able to see that growth. And it can be simple things as listening to, staying focused during practice, saying, are you listening? If for the higher level, maybe high school kids, competing, did you not get a yellow card all season? Those type things for our football fans out there. So yeah, if you've created good quality individual goals for those athletes, you'll be able to see that growth.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Special Olympics offers a number of fantastic resources for coaches to continue learning and improving their coaching knowledge. One, we have the Special Olympics Online Learning Portal. The Special Olympics Online Learning Portal has a great number of resources related to coaching, fitness, health, and protective behaviors. The link to the online learning portal, you can find it in the chat. The Special Olympics website hosts a number of different resource pages for different areas. Make sure to check our resources, Special Olympics org, to access all of these resources, including Unified Sports, Division and Young Athletes. All of these pages will be helping you with your coaching of Special Olympics athletes. On the first page, we have Unified Sports Resource. On the second page, Division in Resources. And the third page, Young Athletes Resources.
En la página de recursos.
And you're going to find all of this in the resources pages.
Este año seguimos teniendo nuestro
This year, we continue having
interactivo para que pueda participar
our
en
interactive
este webinar.
dashboard so you can
Y encontrarán
be
enlaces
part of the webinar series. Here you will find links to resources,
webinar anterior,
recordings of previous webinars,
diapositivas de presentadores,
slides from different presenters,
opción de hacer preguntas a nuestros presentadores,
and the option to ask questions to our presenters and hosts.
penal interactivo con su
This interactive dashboard
ventanilla única para que todos
is a one-stop for everything that has to do with the coach webinar series.
asegúrese de recibir sus preguntas temprano para el penal de las próximas semanas.
Be sure to ask your questions early on for next week's panel.
Próximo webinar. El próximo webinar será sobre el
The next webinar will be about the coaching of adult athletes. This week,
en entrenar y involucrar atletas jóvenes.
we focus on coaching and engaging young athletes. And then next week,
A los atletas
we will see how to keep older athletes in sports and active.
gracias nuevamente a nuestro
Thank you again to our partner Gallagher for their support
para el entrenador de Olimpiadas Especiales.
on the Special Olympics Coach Webinar Series 2023.
Regístrese ahora si aún no lo ha hecho.
You can register now if you haven't done so already so you don't miss out.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.